TLDR, the mistake is not using your persona as a decision lens. I've been running a workshop lately called the 10 most expensive early stage mistakes and how to avoid them. For context, I spent the last 15 plus years in product, working in engineering, building and scaling early stage startups. So when I say that I see these mistakes everywhere, I mean it. I wanted to give a little bit more in depth than just the traditional 90-second video to give you a sneak peek of one of the mistakes in the workshop. So I'm going to just jump right in. So this mistake happens all the time, even with the teams that have done the great steps of conducting user research, creating a persona, and generally feel pretty clear on who they're building for. TLDR, the mistake is not using your persona as a decision lens. Let me explain. Most of the founders take the time to narrow in on who their buyer is. They do the research, understand that buyer's needs, maybe even digging into price sensitivities, just to make sure that they can afford the thing that the startup is building. Not even just afford, but also willing to pay. There's a difference. But once execution starts, what tends to happen is that carefully crafted persona just slowly fades into the background. And the clarity that that persona was supposed to give was never actually really used for this real purpose, in my opinion anyway, which is to guide your decisions and filter what you build next. Instead, roadmap decisions are justified after the fact. This feature makes sense because we need this feature to be competitive, or customer A asked for it, or it'll only take a week. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. But none of those are bad decisions on their own per se. Although reactive, the problem is that these roadmap decisions aren't being evaluated through a consistent lens. And without that lens, every decision can seem reasonable. So you start saying things like, well, our persona could use that, versus questioning, does our persona need that right now? Here's a simple version of how this shows up. A founder says they're building for, let's say, first-time founders. Clear persona, and we can, let's just say, call her Nia. And then they start with a really tight, really focused solution. But as they're building, over time, the conversations around the roadmap start to sound like this. Someone suggests an advanced feature for later stage teams. And then people are like, well, this could also be useful for Nia as a first-time founder. I mean, it would help her make better decisions. Or maybe someone throws out the idea of building workflows that assumes the company has a maturity level, or not teams of 5 or 10. They're talking about teams of 1,000 and 10,000, right? But then you're questioning but that company maturity doesn't really exist for Nia at the stage that you're at. But one of the early customers you have maybe asks for it. There's a mismatch. And then when someone from the team asks why those features were prioritized, these advanced workflow features, or you know what I mean, the answers sound logical, partly because you backed into it. Again, Nia could use it, and it could also be loosely tied to whatever mission the company has, but those are not the same. You know what I mean? You could probably see how in that statement alone, it kind of feels like a kid got caught doing something bad and they're trying to explain it to an elder, waiting to see if they bought it. Well, Nia could use it. Stop asking questions. But if, in those cases, a follow-up question was but why does Nia need it right now? The confidence disappears. And that's the mistake. The persona exists, but it's not being used to decide what to say no to. Here's a reframe that's going to be the unlock for you. Your persona is not a description, it's a filter. Its job is not to help you explain the product. Its job is to help you eliminate the options. If it's not making decisions easier, it's just not doing its job. And I want to acknowledge that this gets harder when there are multiple personas. Buyers versus the users, admins versus operators, decision makers versus the end beneficiaries. But even then, the core problem is still the same. If you're not explicit about who you're optimizing for in that given moment, the roadmap just fills up with compromises. And here's why this mistake matters more than most founders realize. When you don't use your persona as a decision lens, the cost isn't just a messy roadmap. It's, weeks spent building things that just don't move the needle forward. Money burned on features that felt reasonable at the time, but aren't doing anything. Teams pulling in different directions without realizing it. And eventually, there's a quiet moment where you look back and you think, how do we spend all this time and have nothing to show for it? And honestly and truthfully, this is like real talk. These are the situations that I myself have been in companies where we spent 6 months a year building something, building too much and building the wrong things and had zero customers. Anyway, I digress. What makes this especially painful is that it usually shows up late, like after the momentum slows, after the stress level is already up a here, after you've invested enough that changing direction feels expensive and emotional. And that's why this is one of those mistakes that's cheaper to catch early on because you just can't rewind time. Let's put some rough numbers to this. Let's say a small team has 4 outsourced developers at $20,000 a month. A small internal team costing like another $20,000 a month. So $40K in total a month. Now imagine 2 features get prioritized. Let's say, again, these are round numbers, 2 weeks to build each, plus design, marketing, and ops preparation alongside that, right? Because we can't ignore that. So that's easily, let's say, 6 to 8 weeks of effort and $40,000 spent. And why were those features chosen? Competitor reviews, investor feedback, something that sounded impressive. But at the end of the day, your key persona, Nia, didn't care. You building those things didn't solve her problem today. And that time is gone. Those 6 to 8 weeks are gone and that money is spent. And again, this isn't a hypothetical. This is the pattern I've seen repeatedly in real companies. In the workshop, I worked through a version of this for one of my past roles. And trust me, it was way more than a $40,000 mistake. Okay. So if you want to sanity check whether this is happening to your team, sit with these questions. When we debate a feature, do you reference our persona and our data or just opinions? Who are we optimizing for right now, not eventually? And if there are multiple users, who would be most disappointed if the product disappeared? That's helping you prioritize the right persona to solve for right now. And if those answers feel fuzzy, it's also a signal to pay attention to. You may not be getting the true value out of that well-developed persona. So what does this mean for you? It means that it might be actually the best time to step back and pressure test some things. And this is exactly why Inciteful exists, to help founders build without going broke. Inciteful is an advisory marketplace of experienced product design and engineering operators, people who have been there before and have learned all the hard lessons. And we bring you the guidance so that you can work like a senior team without the overhead cost of a senior team. Everything starts with a 45-minute growth assessment. It's designed to be a standalone. You'll get the clarity on where you are, what you're optimizing for, and whether mistakes like this are already showing up, plus very clear next steps. And for some founders, that's enough. But if you need ongoing support as you build, there are subscriptions and token packs for the more as-needed support, so you can get expert perspective without hiring full-time or overcommitting before you're ready. You can use your hours around any of the product design and engineering experts on the platform. And then the growth assessment will give you that place to start. And if you're still figuring out what you need, we can start with a free, simple conversation without getting into the weeds of things. I also run deeper workshops on this exact topic, including the full clarity before building theme, where we unpack multiple mistakes like this and apply them to real situations. And if you're not ready for any of that, there's also the Founder Hub, where I answer questions like this in more depth, the same way I would, say, in a paid conversation, just without the customization. So you can submit your own questions and I'll answer those as well. At Inciteful, we believe that it's time to make unique mistakes and not the same mistakes that everyone else makes. Heads up, about to tell you about my business.